If our NFL championship series before the Super Bowl was a horse race, we'd be rounding the final turn and heading for the home stretch. Yes, that's right. We're in the second to last edition of this great series, the 1964 season, and Rich Smelter, Cleveland Browns historian, joins us to tell us all about it.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pigpen, your portal to positive football history, and welcome to our championship series, the championship games in the National Football League before the Super Bowl. We're going 1933 all the way to 1965, and we're getting near the end here. Tonight, our episode is on the 1964 season, and as always, we have an expert from the team that won the championship. We have our friend that's been a guest on our show multiple times, Rich Smelter, and talking about the 1964 season and the Cleveland Browns. Rich, welcome back to the Pigpen.
Darren, thank you so much. It's an honor to be on your show again, and I'm glad that I'm able to get back on there and talk about the 64 Browns or the 51 Rams, anything you need. I love it. And I love the whole expert thing. I was looking around behind me going, who's he talking about? So I so appreciate that.
Well, let's quantify that expert thing. We had you on a few months ago, and you had a book about the 1964 Browns. That's a book, you dedicated a whole book to it, and they won the championship of the National Football League in 1964. I think you're the perfect expert. I can't think of anybody else that has done that, and
Hey,
you are the man.
thank you, Darren. It's called Drive to Conquest. I had a lot of fun doing it. A lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, and folks, as always, we'll talk a little bit more about the book near the end of this episode. But if you're on the road, you don't have a pen to jot it down, don't worry. We have in the show notes. We'll link you to Rich's book and any other projects we talk about in the show notes of the podcast or on the YouTube channel, whatever you're watching, and also on PigskinDispatch.com in the accompanying article. So, Rich, there's the 1964 season is really an interesting one for the National Football League. We had, the rivalry going on with the AFL, but we also had a couple things that happened in football history that we don't even think about today. And one of them was that 1964 was the first year that the National Football League allowed the home team to wear white jerseys. Prior to that, the home team was always in darks. So now you see teams like Miami and the Cowboys are most common. They always wear white at home. They wear white on the road. You very rarely see them in their dark jerseys. And that sort of started in 1964 season. So that's kind of an interesting tidbit of the National Football League.
Actually, Darren, I didn't even know that. I just remember the Browns having the white jerseys in the 64 title game. And I always just assumed that's how they were. I never knew that little bit of information on that. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Can't go back and put it in the book, but
right. The other big news from the 64 season was the commissioner had brought back two former stars, Alex Karras and Paul Hornig, who were suspended for the 63 season for some nefarious alleged gambling, which they didn't win any appeals on. And they both came back, to the star of the National Football League, came back after missing a full season. So that was the other big news. And then we get into the season itself.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of ironic because both of those guys wound up in the Hall of Fame. So,
Yeah.
it's interesting, and Paul Horning wound up winning a couple more championships after that. So, yeah, I mean, and of course that's going to be discussed on the 1965 program of yours, so I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah, we talk about Horning on a few of these episodes. That's for
Oh
sure.
yeah,
So
yes,
we've already
yeah,
talked to him about a little bit the prior episodes to this, and we have a few more that his name I'm sure will be mentioned, and we'll check that out here in the next few episodes. But
definitely.
what can you tell us about the 64 season and in particular how the Browns were?
Well, the Browns weren't supposed to go anywhere. Even in 1963, when Blanton Collier took over after owner Art Modell fired Paul Brown, which rocked the football world, at least in Cleveland it did, and I would probably say around the whole nation. Blanton Collier took over, had a lot of pressure on him, and he just allowed the players to be the players. and he would listen to what they said and everything. And the Browns turned it around and they won 10 games that year. And they just couldn't get past the New York Giants, who were going for their third straight Eastern Division champion or Eastern Conference championship. But they wound up being in the playoff bowl. But and people didn't really like that because it was like a runner-up bowl. It didn't really matter. But then in 1964, people were still saying that the Giants were going to win, even though they were all long in the tooth and everything. They were even saying that the St. Louis Cardinals were going to possibly win that. And so the Browns were favored to be third place at best. And there's a lot of talk, their defense was terrible. They didn't have they had small guys in the defensive backfield. Their only stars that they really had was Jim Brown, and Paul Warfield was a rookie, but he turned out to be a sensation. Gary Collins was a fantastic wide receiver, but that was really about it. I mean, the defense, again, as I said, was average at best and all. And but the Browns came out of nowhere again because Blanton Collier listened. He was a great statistician. They said give him a quart of ice cream, vanilla ice cream, and a projector, and he could beat anybody. And in the long run, he did.
Yeah, I mean it's really amazing. There's always a graphic that whoever enters things in Wikipedia for these. If you look up each NFL season in Wikipedia, somebody has gone in and done the standings of each week. So the 1964 season had 14 regular season games. So each week they had who was in first for each of the conferences because we had a Western and an Eastern conference. This would be before the merger of the AFL. So I believe 14 teams in the league that year. And so they have, there's a 3 or 4 way tie after week one. And if you look on the Eastern side, which Cleveland was in, they were in first place every single of the 14 seasons or 14 weeks. And except the first 6, they were tied with St. Louis. So you talked about the Cardinals a little bit before that. They were tied with them, and early on, Philadelphia was in there after week one. But the rest of the way, Cleveland, all the way down the chart. Same thing with their opponent, the Baltimore Colts, who they end up ultimately facing. Spoiler alert. They're in first place, but everything except the first 3 weeks. It's the Rams and Detroit and Green Bay the first 3 weeks, and then the Colts come on like gangbusters and dominate the rest of the year. So these were definitely the two marquee teams in the National Football League that season.
Well, they were supposed to, I mean, the Baltimore Colts were supposed to just come into Cleveland and blow them out. Now, even though Baltimore had the better record, back in the days before the Super Bowl, the winning team, the host of the championship game, it didn't matter if you were 14-0 or 7-7 if you won it. Whoever that year was, that you is the even years were the Eastern Division or the Eastern Conference. A lot of times they went by different names, and then the odd years were the West. It just so happens that 64 championship came on an even year, so the Browns were able to host that game. And the Colts were supposed to come in and just be wrecking machines, and rightfully so. I mean, you had Johnny Unitas at his peak. Lenny Moore was comeback player of the year. He scored 20 touchdowns. I mean, he was just an amazing ball player. You had Raymond Berry, an unbelievable wide receiver. John Mackey, one of the stereotypical preeminent tight ends, one of the first ones beside Ditka. So, I mean, you had this wrecking machine and a great defense, and it was just it was supposed to be so lopsided. Unitas was supposed to just rip this team apart because the Browns had a weak secondary. They had the worst secondary in the league, and Unitas was again at the height of his career. And so even Carroll Rosenblum, who owned the Colts at that time, when he came into town, Art Modell went up to him and said, just kind of doing the stereotypical, hey, let's be good sports. He came up, he goes, hey, Carroll, please do me a favor and have your boys, I hope we give you guys a good game. And Carroll Rosenblum, instead of saying, oh, I'm sure you will, he goes, oh, don't worry, Art, we'll try to take it easy on you. And it was like, he goes, I'll try not to run up the score. And it was kind of like, and they said he wasn't laughing, and people were just, like Jim Kanicki, he was a second-year defensive tackle. he'd be in a shopping center somewhere, a grocery store, and people would come up to him, hey, the Colts are going to crush you, Jim Parker's going to eat you alive, and they what they underestimated was, again, Blanton Collier, who just, again, you give him a projector, a movie projector, and some vanilla ice cream, and he'd sit in his house and just break everything down. And Bernie Parrish, who was the defensive signal caller in the backfield, he would go there and chart all these plays, and he would be there with him, and they would study film and all. And then they started to pick up on certain things where, if no matter how invincible that this team is, they were watching some of the defensive backs against, on how they reacted from the Colts. And they said, well, you know what? If they did this to Raymond Berry in practice, that's probably how he made the team. So they were kind of like, okay, so let's do this, let's, give him a shot at the line instead of, trying to back off and let Berry you'd get his bearings and stuff like this and let him get into the field, chuck him a little bit at the line of scrimmage and kind of throw him off, because Unitas had perfect timing. Unitas would drop back a certain amount of time and throw the ball where it was, and you better be there. And so it was just a total absolute timing thing on the Colts. So they said, if we do that and we do like a bump and run and we just stick with that, and we just drop, we send the line. The Browns had a thing called a charging line instead of a reaction line. Nick Skorich was the was the line coach, and wanted them to have a charging line. He goes, we charge that team, have those backers drop back into the passing lanes to kind of block Unitas, and the secondary, will take care of the receivers, Jimmy Orr and Raymond Berry and John Mackey. They go, we can't lose this game. There's no way that we could lose this game. And then also we had the great Jim Brown, who was a psychological weapon more than even just as equal as he was a physical weapon. So, you had all these elements, and that defense did a fantastic job. It was nothing at the end of the first half. I mean, they were shocking the football world. And then all of a sudden, then the offense just exploded. Jim Brown ran off a 46-yard run and almost scored a touchdown. And then on the play right after that, Gary Collins scored a touchdown, because Gary Collins kept saying, I can beat Bobby Boyd, because Gary Collins was a taller man. Bobby Boyd was a shorter defensive back. He goes, I can beat him anytime. And it was a cold day, but Collins always said that his hands, he never got cold. So he says, my hands were never cold. He goes, I can catch this ball with no problem. He goes, I can beat him anytime. And he did. He's Mr. Post Pattern. He ran in there, and, first touchdown, and then, Groza scored a field goal, and then Gary Collins scored a touchdown. So before you know, it was 10-0. Then Collins scored another touchdown. It was 17-0, and then Groza again with a field goal, and then Collins delivered the coup de grace when he scored on, I believe it was a 51-yard pass, and he beat Bobby Boyd. I mean, Bobby Boyd was just trying to hang on for dear life onto him. And then Jim Brown, they should have had another touchdown. Jim Brown did go over you could see that the ball broke the plane, and that's when they used to have the goal line, that's when they used to have the goalpost real close to the end zone, or to the goal line. Jim Brown reached up over and grabbed a hold of it, and you could see the ball broke the plane, but they did not give it to him on 3 straight times. So Lou Groza had to kick a field goal, and Jim Brown said that always bothered him. And I read it in his book called Out of Bounds years ago. And Jim Brown was coming into town, into Cleveland, to do a book signing, and I couldn't make it. So I asked my dear wife. She said that she would gladly go and do it for me, and she went with a friend of hers. I had a picture of him running the ball behind Dick Shaft and Gene Hickerson, and the book. So I said, if you can only sign one thing, just have him sign the picture, just show that you have the book. Well, she went up over there and they were saying, oh, he can only sign one thing. And Jim Brown looked, and he said, he didn't say anything. And then my wife said, she goes, I just want you to know, my husband says in his heart that he knows you scored that touchdown. And she said he just roared with laughter. And he looked and he goes, you tell your husband he's okay. And then they said, well, okay, Mr. Brown, you can only sign one of these things. He goes, for her, I'll sign anything she wants. He signed the book, he signed the picture, personalized it to me. So it was a really a cool moment. It was just one little blip in the book, but it meant a lot. It went a long way. And she goes, I can't believe Jim Brown laughed. I never saw Jim Brown ever laugh. So nice. It was a nice feeling. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was an incredible feeling. And for the city of Cleveland at that time, and then when they were having a party at a hotel after that. They said Jim Brown went home to get his wife, and they came back. And when Jim Brown entered the room, everybody in unison just stood up and applauded and started to clap. And Jim Brown said he really never felt such camaraderie, like that. But they knew when it was nothing at the end of the first half that they had him beat. And they said, Unitas was running for his life. He only threw for 95 yards. With John Unitas, I mean, sometimes he threw for 95 yards in one quarter. So all of a sudden he did that for just one day. And he was able to run, maybe he would get 7 yards, whatever. And they said, it didn't matter because Unitas can't beat us with his legs. He can only beat us with his arm. And they totally took that away from him. Just with some great defense. And, just applied pressure, dropped those linebackers back. His passing lanes were thrown off with that little chuck. So they did a great job with them.
Yeah, so that's a pretty dominant performance of winning that championship game. And I guess maybe we should have pointed this out earlier in our conversation here. But how did these teams get to where they are? Because if you look at it, if you're just look at the championship games, we talked quite a bit about Cleveland in the 1950s. We talked quite a bit about the Baltimore Colts in the 1950s. But the 1960s, it's the Eagles, it's the Packers, it's the Giants. Those names are coming up time after time in the championship games. And then, all of a sudden, we have 63, the last time we talked about the Bears and the Giants, but the Giants are still in it. And now two different teams totally who haven't been in a championship game in over 5 or 6 years,
Yeah.
all of a sudden come in the spot, and then really you don't hear about them for a while, for after that.
Yeah, the Colts couldn't get past the Packers then. After that,
Yeah.
for it was either the Packers or the Vikings, and they just couldn't get past them. Just like the LA Rams at that time, best team that never won the Super Bowl in the later 60s. But you had
Yeah.
those two alpha dogs, the Packers and the Vikings, and the Colts just couldn't get past. Well, they did break out in 68, but they got
Right.
beat by Joe Namath in the Super Bowl. But that's for a different day. But yeah, it was an incredible feeling. I would have to say, Darren, in all honesty, that was probably, when you look at the pre-Super Bowl championship games, I would probably say that 64 championship for the Browns, not only did they win where they shouldn't have won, but they won by 27 points against a powerful Colts team, and they shut out possibly, quite arguably, however you want to put it, one of the top five quarterbacks of all time. And at that time in Unitas' career, he was unmatched. Unmatched by, I mean, you could go down the roll call of all the other teams at that time, and Johnny Unitas would win out over all of them. Even Bart Starr, at that up to that time, and Y.A. Tittle and all. He dominated dominated them all. So to shut him out, and Raymond Berry, the great receiver that he was, and everything, to completely shut them out was just an amazing feat. And I would say that was probably the greatest upset in NFL championship game history, again, from 33 to 65.
Yeah, I think you have a great argument for that. Uh, Rich, we talked earlier that you had a book on the 64 Browns. You've told us the title. So why don't you again tell us what the title of that is and where folks can get a copy of it?
It's called Drive to Conquest, and it's the story of the 1964 Cleveland Browns. And you can go to Amazon and just punch in Drive to Conquest, and it'll come up. It's an orange cover with the Cleveland Browns 64 team picture right in the middle, and you can't miss it.
All right. Well, Rich, we really appreciate you coming in here and sharing your knowledge and research that you've done on the Browns and this tremendous 1964 season that they had and the NFL had. And we thank you for your time and again sharing your passion.
Darren, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. And I'm going to be having a book coming out actually soon on the pre-Super Bowl championships, which is kind of ironic on their all the NFL and AFL, AAFC championship games from 33 to 65. So that'll be coming out soon. So everyone, you probably get a chance to hear me again on Darren's show. So I'm bracing you now. If you see my name on there, you don't want to listen to me ramble on. You don't have to listen to me, but listen to Darren because he's a great guy.
All right. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.